welcome to the ICT Pulse podcast. I'm Michelle Marius, your host and the editor and publisher of ICT Pulse, the online platform where we discuss ICT issues from a Caribbean perspective. Welcome to our finally community chat for 2018, in which we'll be discussing tech trends in the region. Joining me today are two individuals who are no stranger to ICT Pulse and our podcast, having been interviewed earlier this year. And they also tend to keep tabs on the tech happenings across the region. Ingrid Riley is the founder of Silicon Caribe Media, a digital media and events company which operates a platform, Silicon Caribe, which reports on trends, also produces guides and watch lists. And we have Yacine Khelladi, an economist, international consultant, and the moderator of the Caribbean ICT Stakeholders Virtual Community, CIVIC, which is a multi-stakeholder, multilingual regional network. Welcome to you again, and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me, Michelle.
Yes, thank you. And congratulations for all these podcasts all this year.
Thank you so much. So as I said earlier, we'll be diving into the tech trends this year. What was big, what we thought would have gained traction but surpassed or fell short of our expectations, and what might be in store for us in 2019. All right, Ingrid, let's start us off. What did you think was big this year?
Well, a number of things. I'm going to tend to look especially also in the startup space. So I made a little bit of a list here. What was big this year? A soberness and sort of a true focus in the startup space. And I think what I call it, especially in Jamaica, which pretty much still leads the region in terms of its development of the tech startup ecosystem. There is, I think we've moved beyond the hype phase and now into, oh my goodness, let's get serious and get some stuff done phase, which I call it the soberness and a better focus in the startup space. Other thing that I noted too was cybersecurity has everybody woke. Very much so. It's extremely awake. Mm-hmm. And that is definitely linked to also data privacy and data protection issues. On my list also is fintech, anything that has to deal with people's money or ability to make it and move it, is really important. The two things that I was tracking but was really kind of interesting and surprised is the food delivery business, especially enhanced by mobile apps. Mobile app-based food delivery businesses have definitely blossomed, especially in Jamaica and Trinidad. And weed tech. Weed tech also is something definitely going to be interesting to watch as well. So those are the things that were on my list.
Okay. So Yacine, what about you? What have you been seeing or have not been seeing over the past year?
I was going to say that a trend that I'm not seeing is regulators addressing the issues of bettering quality of service and regulations to increase the penetration of fiber in remote areas where wireless is not always the best option for quality, at least to the towers having fiber. And this is a pending issue in many of the rural areas of the Caribbean, particularly in Haiti and Dominican Republic, of course.
Yes.
I'm not sure about the other smaller islands. So that's why I have a poor connectivity today to talk to you. But in general terms, I think the region, I feel like there is a slowdown in innovating in new policies, in new regulations, in new areas of, apart from two or three fancy things like blockchain or like being the next Silicon Valley of the Caribbean, everybody is candidate. I don't see much in like really strong digital agendas moving through the region. I mean, like pushing adoption and innovation in all areas, from government to businesses to individuals, etc. And I also don't see much issues of digital inclusion being addressed, like with specific policies, program, and agendas to better include the less or the more needy, or those who don't have the same chances to benefit from digital tools and digital inclusion. So this maybe it's not exactly a tech trend, but more like a tech policy trend, I see,
Right.
or I see missing. Also, I don't see much of the. I mean, there is concern about. All this year we've seen a lot of things coming from abroad, a lot of discussions about fake news, about manipulation, about using social networks for politically manipulated intentions and all these things. And apart from Trinidad, where it was obvious that there was something happening, I don't see in the Caribbean much discussion about it, much empowerment of civil society and others on, having a stake at that, and that also maybe, a lot of passivity, let's say, in this area. And apart from the blockchain enthusiast versus the blockchain deceived, or I don't know how to call them, which is the only big discussion I see going around, at least in the space where I participate. I don't see much discussion on the main issues that we should have.
Yeah.
Let's say, as a Caribbean, a stronger reflection and stronger input and new policies and moving ahead. I see also we are still lagging a lot behind in the areas of, say, artificial intelligence or the use of algorithms, all that, and just continue this trend of being importers and consumers of externally produced technology, rather than starting maybe strategies to have in some areas, in some small areas where we could have really an edge or a competitive advantage to move that forward.
Understood. So, Ingrid, do you have any thoughts on what Yacine has said?
Without question. No, having been in the carbon tech ecosystem for around 12 or so years, and watched especially the startup space come in and go and across the region in terms of, we're at different levels, in terms of how we're thinking about, yes, strong digital agendas, in terms of really kind of not just talking about, but facilitating integration of digital into on different levels, that would spawn innovation, from government across to private sector into education and different sectors. There's been a lot of talk, I believe, but when it comes to actual on the ground execution, I'm definitely not seeing as much as I'd like to see. I'm sure that's what Yacine is talking about as well. He's not seeing that as much.
Indeed.
And when it comes to digital inclusion, especially when it comes to women and people from not so privileged socioeconomic backgrounds,
And those who are differently abled as well.
Again, there's talk of initiatives, and there's one or two, but there's not like you can say, "Oh my goodness," you can feel it and see it, the strength of it. And my default is typically being an optimist. So it is my hope that 2019 we will see more of that, because the new buzzword that popped up this year was digital transformation. So we'll see how people actually interpret that and execute on that in 2019. But I'd definitely love to see, more of what. So yes, I agree with Yacine where that is concerned. Yeah.
Okay. So, Ingrid, tell us more about this weed tech. I'm quite fascinated by it. And certainly, too, I'm sure once our listeners hear it, their ears will perk up. What has been happening in that space?
Well, like what, the trend, it's trending across, especially the United States and Canada, which legalized recreational use of marijuana. And in 2019, they're going to open up the space to the edibles market, food and drink. So there's a lot of jostling by big name American companies and Canadian-based companies to get in on that. There is even more talk here, in the States, because I'm currently in New York, of New York and a couple of other states also legalizing recreational use. And so across the region, Jamaica decriminalized it decriminalized ganja a couple of years ago. The industry has definitely been blossoming in terms of, opening of dispensaries. People are now, growing medical marijuana. People are flooding in to invest in the growing and the packaging of medical marijuana. I see, we read about Whoopi Goldberg and her, LA-based cannabis for women, medical cannabis for women business, seeking to go to Antigua to set up some operations there as well. And just the overall, there's a palpable pulse of talk and movement in the Caribbean cannabis industry.
Mm-hmm.
And what I'm seeing manifest is definitely people leveraging the digital space, your Instagrams and your websites and that kind of thing to market everything from accessories to the wonderful buds. And so that's definitely, I know you haven't come to it, but I'm definitely looking for weed, cannabis, Caribbean cannabis, and the tech integration. The cannabis industry's tech integration is going to be really interesting, especially in the Caribbean space, because I think there is an underlying craving and almost like a sense of entitlement, especially by Jamaica, that listen, our brand globally has been somewhat, tied to weed and cannabis. We ought to be one of the major players in the economic growth of the legal cannabis industry. So I'm looking towards seeing startups in the space next year. And so, yeah.
Okay. All right. So I guess just for my little list, because I did have some of the things that you mentioned, Ingrid, but I also saw that there seems to be greater take up by companies, and I would probably specify maybe the larger countries of analytics and business intelligence.
Mm.
I think that somehow we're starting to get with it in terms of the fact that we ought to be making better decisions, more robust decisions, and data is the way to go. And
Yes.
we often are generating data as companies, and it can be used to improve the business that we're operating.
Right.
The second thing that I saw was the whole issue of disaster management and resilience. Granted that would primarily be at like policy levels, country levels, but I think certainly, we are still all feeling this thing, whether or not directly or indirectly, from the 2017 hurricane season.
Right.
So I think it really has caused us to kind of stand up and pay attention,
Mm-hmm.
and really try to be a little bit more vigilant
Mm-hmm.
in how we manage those situations.
Yes.
And the final thing out of my list was the whole issue of lean telecoms. And I actually went back to the article that I published. It probably would have been at either the very end of 2017 or very early 2018. And I had that down, and I recognized that we continue to see a lot of the telecoms providers, either they're downsizing, streamlining.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them are selling off assets to try to make themselves more profitable.
Right.
And of course, we are having, whether it's the trade unions and the governments react to the fact that, these changes are occurring, and probably trying to stop the wave. But, it has been happening for years, and it is one of the symptoms of or characteristics of liberalization and competition.
Right.
And the world has gotten increasingly competitive.
Very much so. Yep. And also just the whole development of technologies, that there are certain things that have come to make some of their products and services irrelevant.
Exactly.
Cause some controversy. So with the influx of things like WhatsApp and Viber,
Mm-hmm.
and Facebook and Google, in the telecom space, you can now call and text just having Wi-Fi. That has definitely hit quite a few of the Caribbean telecoms businesses as well. So they're going to have to okay, well, what are we going to be in the next 3 to 5 years? And so it's been interesting to see some of them moving to become media companies, content.
Yes, exactly. So Yacine, just going back to your list of points where most of them were things that you were not seeing. I think the only one that you mentioned was fintech. Are there any other trends that you've been seeing for the past year?
Not really, not really. I'm sorry. Maybe I didn't do all my homework to review all the things I posted during the year, but I'm just wondering how much we are not moving much slower. I said also in terms of regional policies.
Yes.
I mean, this ICT single space has been on the table for a few years now. I remember like 2 years ago, something happened. It was pushed and approved, and somewhere in the middle of last year or the beginning of first quarter, I'm not sure, the governments of CARICOM move it forward. But I'm not seeing this happen. And what Ingrid was mentioning about new possible niche markets or industries taking up on ICTs, I think that if that doesn't happen, it will be harder
Yes.
for the Caribbean to grab any opportunity in any field, not just our traditional tourism, rum, music things, but also these new markets like the one that Ingrid mentioned. That if we're not moving quickly and putting these enabling frameworks for businesses to strive across the Caribbean and be able to move things, assets, ideas, business models across the Caribbean. The fact that the Caribbean is a lot of small scattered islands with each one its own regulations, governance, and systems will not enable the Caribbean to make it. So I would really, I'm thinking like it's like it's a multi-level crisis in the Caribbean in terms of countries not being able to close their budget years or to pay to balance their finances and things, and the impacts of the different things happening all over the world, from oil to wars or to whatever. And then this innovation opportunity comes, and we're not ready, and we're still focusing on the old brick and mortar things, and maybe not looking at that. If we don't grab that, we are going to lose both the old way of doing business and the new way of doing business too. So I think it's still seen as the techie thing, the nice thing to have, but not this essential building block of innovation and growth and prosperity in the Caribbean.
No, definitely. That is so true. Because as much as we're talking about all of the wonderful things that are happening or could be happening, oftentimes what the reality is that there needs to be the enabling environment within the region for them to really take hold.
Yeah.
And as much as sometimes the politicians are coming out and saying how, they support innovation, the fact that the enabling environment has not been improved
Yep.
is definitely a challenge. And I guess we'll see what happens going forward. So let's move into the next phase, 2019. Yacine, let me start with you. What is on your what are you hoping for, seeing already that may manifest in 2019?
You mean my what I think will happen? That's the question. Sorry,
Yes,
I
please.
just missed. Okay. I think it will get harder for the Caribbean to be competing in this field still, because it's ICTs for ICTs by ICTs. It's making it much more. I mean, everybody's competing with everybody everywhere, and if you don't keep the pace, you get behind. Even if you don't do nothing, if you don't do as fast as the others, you're behind. So even if you progress a little bit, you're not progressing as much as others. And I'm worried. To be honest, I'm worried in this region. I think we can't, we won't grab again. I mean, this is maybe already what happened last year, but I'm afraid it will continue. I'm afraid we don't have the right, maybe capacity, the right, not only capacity. I mean, it's really a matter. I know. I mean, because I often talk with policymakers and people who are in general and ICT policy making, and it's very difficult to really put the effort that is needed, and you really need a strong leadership and a strong vision and things, because if it doesn't happen, I mean, if we just keep as we are and moving at the pace we are, and that's what I think will happen, unfortunately, I think we will be more lagging behind in general, in terms of ICT adoption, in terms of countries' competitiveness, in terms of of how ICT is impacting, social and economic development in the country. We're not getting it where it should be, and I'm afraid it will continue like that.
Understood. And I definitely agree. I mean, I was also, as you're talking, I was thinking through the whole fintech space, because there are some countries that really have sort of taken the bull by the horns and trying to get out there, get out front of that space, especially in respect to blockchain as well as digital currency.
Yep.
And as much as they might be doing a lot there and they're looking to, make some serious strides, whether or not, or the extent to which the rest of the ecosystem is being given attention, because, it's almost as if we're still looking at technology in silos. So fintech is taking off, but we're not looking at inclusion. So, what happens there? I recognize your points, Yacine, and I do share your concern. Ingrid, talk to me.
Yeah, without question. Here's what I'm happy about. I'm happy that for the most part across a number of many of the Caribbean countries, we have about around 100% in terms of mobile penetration. In terms of internet access, most of the Caribbean nations are beyond 50% penetration. So, in terms of using what we have, that's where I think the entrepreneurs and the innovators come into play. So that's why I'm looking forward to more women being in the technology space. I'm seeing some bubbling up in certain sectors, like the food delivery and e-commerce. Again, I have to, be very excited about weed and tech in 2019, and seeing what startups and other entrepreneurs are going to be doing in that space, both from marketing to actually further integrating tech in the business of cannabis in the region. Whether we like it or not, cybersecurity and data issues would definitely have to keep us very awake. We lack a lot of skills in terms of being able to handle the demands of heightened, cybersecurity problems, and we need to get into that. What I'm hoping that we spend more time on, and this could possibly be where a digital agenda or digital inclusion is comes in, is whether it's government or NGOs, or it could be innovators or private sector, take on the business of digital skills. We across the region, a lot of people, in the ecosystem, in the startup ecosystem, are largely they're self-taught,
Mm-hmm.
and there's nothing wrong with that. And thankfully, because of the internet, they have access to the internet. They can, learn new skills on the fly and use that to do different things. But I think a more strategic and consistent and focused approach has to be taken on the government level as well, on a private sector level, to take on training up our Caribbean people in digital skills.
Mm-hmm.
It is really, really, really going to be important. So I'm hoping that in 2019 we see some serious initiatives where that is concerned. But my default is always to optimism, and that's why I always try and see what exactly is going on and try to amplify that, so maybe it can inspire others and pass on information that others may need, so they can actually maybe say, hey, if it's happening in Grenada or in Barbados or in Bahamas, then maybe we can try this here in St. Kitts or in Cuba or in Jamaica. So that's me right now.
Okay, excellent. And I certainly agree with you there. The whole issue of digital literacy is something that is quite close to my heart. And it's something that I don't think that it would necessarily take a lot, but it needs to be driven, at the policy level. Because here it is that we're still sort of focusing on computer literacy.
Yeah.
But digital literacy is a whole other ball game, and we need that in this day and age.
Without question, and we talk about economic development and job creation. That to me is going to be a key pillar.
Mm-hmm.
Training up our people in digital skills is going to be a key pillar in driving or the Caribbean digital economy forward. I don't want to hear any more about freaking BPOs. Give me a damn break. Those skills are going to be taken over easily in another couple of years, by AI.
Yes.
So let's train up our people in skills that that are built to last and that can actually generate real jobs over time.
Absolutely. I think also for me, one of the things that I think is going to happen and is going to bring Yacine's concern to a head is that whole issue, the whole excitement around fintech. And when we get to the point where we realize that we cannot push forward because some things are lagging.
Yeah.
And I think that may happen this year. 2019.
I hope so, because one thing that I'm excited about blockchain and cryptocurrency and that drive by Bahamas and Barbados and to a lesser extent Aruba as well, because they're all pretty much seem to be jostling to become the blockchain capital of the Caribbean. What I'm hoping that it highlights is this nagging, dragging problem that we've had as entrepreneurs, or just generally, and it's the issue of payments.
Mm-hmm.
And or ease of being able to set up, whether, on whatever digital platforms, or ability to take credit cards, to process them, to have them efficiently and consistently come into our bank account that facilitates the business, moving and growing in a particular way. Too many of our Caribbean businesses, large and small and in the startup space, have had to resort to registering their businesses outside of the region and keeping the money outside of the region, which defeats the whole purpose of innovation and having that money circulate in the local economy. So that's what I'm hoping that the fintech and the blockchain and the cryptocurrency argument does. I say, listen, we need to get our act together where that is concerned, and we need to take on these legacy banks that have been holding us back with their ridiculously bloated fees and their legacy tech systems, and put in some legal framework and some other frameworks that enable and really kind of leave it wide open for innovation from startups and others to come in and do some interesting things that facilitate our people to be able to, make and move our money with ease.
Definitely. Yacine, any other thoughts? I think I'm getting to the point where we can wrap up.
So many. No, just to Ingrid, I had several thoughts. First one was on penetration and use, and I think that here maybe we lack of understanding of how much the people are using. I mean, being covered by a signal, 3G or having a cable accessibility near doesn't mean necessarily that you're using it, or doesn't mean that you're using it as much as you could or you should. And again, it's a difficulty. And then there is, of course, the capacity, the understanding what is the potential. I mean, and all that's to what you rightly pointed at, the capacity or the skills or the knowledge. But and then there is another area of that is the affordability. Again, I mean, for me, the Caribbean is the whole Caribbean, and I know that in some countries, even in Dominican Republic, 60% of the population doesn't have what we call doesn't reach the affordability threshold, which is 2% of your income for a gig of data. So that still means that a lot of people that maybe they do access a little bit, they do a little WhatsApp, a little Facebook, a little so and so, they don't have enough purchasing power of data to really do all what they could, like study, banking, like as you said, or access government services. So they would just limit their use. And when you break down into gender, by gender, you will see that often there is also a higher disparity, at least in Dominican Republic and Haiti, I'm sure, because I work on the field in those two countries. There is a higher disparity of capacity of use. So they would say, yes, they have a connection. Yes, they do use a little bit sometimes, but not enough, and not enough of what really could change their lives or could make a difference in their lives. So that's for that point. On the other side, about all these technologies, they cannot be separated again from your national or regional development strategies. I mean, if we are based on tourism and this and that, so how are all these things being integrated into it? And sometimes it seems that there is a disconnect between a lot of interest and things in technology and then what's really making the economy of these countries. And the connect is not easy. It's complicated. It's difficult. I mean, you really have to look at all. I mean, I saw some interesting work, for example, by CTF looking at agriculture and fisheries and what's the value chain, and how ICTs can at each step from preparing, each step of the process of the value chain, integrate ICTs into it. But I'm seeing a lot of other sectors where it's not happening, but it's not necessarily happening, and or maybe not enough.
Yeah.
And that's also bring to the other discussion of what is the development model we're looking for. I mean, we had for, at least in some of the countries, we have these textile free trade zones, or I don't know how you call them, maquilas, no, where you bring basically the things to cut and sew, and then they re-exported, and people have a very low salary for doing just a very simple job. We can replace that with computers, and like we had also the call center. Sometimes the low end, let's say, side of the call center where there is not much add value, also look at that, and then we can. I've been participating in this project in Haiti with LACNIC and the Caribbean Open Institute, and doing this. It's a pilot research, training young girls from very low to low income groups in Haiti. And I mean, if what we're gonna get is people that will be still in the low add value side of the equation, we're not getting into development. We're just replacing a sewing machine with a computer.
Exactly.
That's maybe where we have to think about what really the Caribbean wants as a development model, and what is really, and then we can see how ICTs can help us all along the way. And that may be the discussion I'm not seeing.
Yeah.
Because if we're still relying on the same, Guyana has rice, and now they have petroleum, but others have beaches, others have this. So what is the next? I mean, what is our development model for the long term, and how ICTs can help us get there? And taking into account that now we've become the meat of a lot of other people's business. Data. As we know now, everyone now, we have our WhatsApps and on Facebook, and basically we are contributing to, these huge companies, US-based or elsewhere-based, that are doing a lot of money out of us being the product. Us as our personal profiles being the product, and then being sold to those who want to manipulate elections or politics and all these things. So, there doesn't need to be both this development and this, how ICT is impacting us as societies, and what are we looking forward to become, and then we can, I would say, and then we can discuss how ICTs are going to help us get there. But if this big discussion is not happening, ICTs will just reproduce the same inequalities, the same inefficiencies in the digital space.
Absolutely. Quite sobering, Yacine, but it's so true. I guess just in terms of me wrapping up, somehow I feel as if in the last year or so, as much as, for example, Fintech has been, the big buzzword in the region, somehow the dynamics seem to have changed. I don't necessarily feel as if we are, as Ingrid may have said, although it was primarily with respect to entrepreneurship, somehow I feel as if the hype has gone, and whether or not we sort of realizing that we need to buckle down and get ready for the long haul.
Yes.
So it's quite interesting. I feel as if that there is a change, and probably, the reckoning is what we're beginning to go through, where I somehow feel as if 2019 is going to be a make or break year. I recalled in my discussion with Jennifer Britton of CARICOM, and we were talking about the single ICT space, that, I guess, as Yacine said, there was a lot of talk about it, and it sort of died down.
Yeah.
And I gather that they're probably trying to put things in place, but it's taking a while. And I guess I'll be touching base with her in the next few weeks to see where things are at. But which I'm hoping will begin to drive countries to do more than what they're doing currently.
On that matter, Michelle, is something that I when I went to another policy discussion meeting in DC, I think maybe 2 or so years ago, it was done by OAS. And, as we talk about, we have this sort of a boom, and then, sort of a quiet, boom in terms of announcement is what we want to do, what we're going to do, and then there's quiet. And I was like, we have to, policymakers have to realize that they can't continue to work in silos or in silence.
Yes.
And that there needs to be a consistent and sustained communication of what they're doing along the process. Does it also help them to maybe become more efficient and to be more transparent in terms of getting things done. But it also shows us, the people who are paying the taxes and that kind of a thing, to say, oh gosh, this thing is actually still going on.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we could say a little bit, as you talk about matters regarding the single ICT space, we could also do that about data.
Mm-hmm.
Data and open data, and that was very sexy 4 or 5 years ago.
Yes.
And then it kind of went into a lull. What exactly had happened? You know what I mean? And so it could very mean that, okay, well, fine, we had this big boom, but then things are actually going on, but we haven't seen a consistent communication of what is going on. And we have to encourage the organizations that are involved in this process to become more open,
Mm-hmm.
to put blogs out, podcasts out, whatever it is, to become somewhat of a mini media company and communicate. And we can't just do things the way we usually do by, once every 2 years, we put together a 30-page report and say, hey, this is what we've been up to. And, by the way, we haven't really reached much further from there. That has to be the old way.
Mm-hmm.
And we have got to do something different moving forward.
Absolutely. Yes. There are some interesting gems in all of this discussion. I'm looking forward to reviewing it over the next few weeks. So I guess I'm going to sign off now. And although we can probably talk about some of these issues some more, I do think that we would have given our audience a lot of food for thought. So Ingrid, thank you again for joining us on this Trends Briefing.
Thank you for having me.
And Yacine, thank you so much for joining us again. And I think that you gave us, considerable food for thought. So I'm sure the audience is going to be having to think intently about what you've been saying.
Okay, thank you. And I'm really sorry about my connectivity environment today, but that's the reality of some areas, remote areas of our Caribbean.
That's it for today's episode. Thank you so much for listening to the ICT Pulse podcast. You can find links to some of the things we talked about on our website, ict-pulse.com. If you like this episode, please show your support by leaving us a review on iTunes, as it will help others find the show. You can email us at info@ict-pulse.com or drop us a note on our Facebook page, facebook.com/ICTPulse, or via Twitter @ICTPulse. We hope you'll join us again for our next episode. Take care.